The rain hammered against the windows of Sacred Heart Elementary like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Inside room 14, Matthew Shaw knelt beside a puddle of spilled paint, her calloused hands working a worn towel in circles that had become almost meditative. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. They'd been doing that for 3 weeks now, and maintenance kept promising to fix them tomorrow, always tomorrow. She could hear the custodian's cart squeaking down the hallway, Mr. Rodriguez humming that same bolero he'd been humming since she started working here 5 years ago. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Miss Shaw, I'm sorry, came the small voice behind her. Lily Chun, 7 years old, stood with her hands clasped in front of her paint-splattered uniform. The girl's lower lip trembled, and Matthew could see she was fighting back tears with everything she had. Matthew looked up, her dark hair falling across her face, and offered the warmest smile she could muster despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like sediment. Lily, sweetheart, accidents happen. Do you know how many times I've spilled paint? Once. I knocked over an entire gallon of red all over the principal's new white shoes. She hadn't, but the lie was worth the small giggle it earned. Really? Lily asked, her eyes widening. Really? Matthew confirmed, standing up with a slight wince. Her knees weren't what they used to be. 34 felt more like 44 some days. Now, why don't you help me finish cleaning this up? And then we can work on your butterfly project together. I think it's going to be the most beautiful one in the whole class. Lily's face transformed, tears forgotten, replaced by that pure childhood joy that made Matthew's job worth every struggle. They worked together in comfortable silence, Matthew teaching the girl how to wring out the towel properly, how to check the corners where paint liked to hide. These small moments, she'd learned, were where real teaching happened, not in the lesson plans or standardized tests, but in the quiet spaces between. Through the window, Matthew could see the parking lot filling with sleek cars, Mercedes, BMWs, even a Tesla or two. This was Pacific Heights, after all, where the median home price could buy a small castle in most other states. Sacred Heart Elementary catered to the children of tech moguls, investment bankers, and old money families whose names appeared on museum wings and hospital pavilions. Matthew's 15-year-old Honda Civic, with its duct-taped side mirror and passenger door that only opened from the inside, sat in the far corner like an apologetic relative at a society wedding. She didn't belong here, not really. The other teachers, most of them, came from similar backgrounds as the parents. They summered in Tuscany, knew which wine paired with which cheese, and spoke about art galleries the way Matthew spoke about the clearance rack at Target. But she was good at her job, exceptional even, and Sacred Heart's progressive director, Margaret Wu, believed that children needed to see teachers from all walks of life. All done, Lily announced proudly, holding up the paint-stained towel like a trophy. Perfect, Matthew said, ruffling the girl's hair. Now, let's get you to aftercare before your mom arrives. She walked Lily down the hallway, past walls decorated with children's artwork that exploded with color and unbridled imagination. A finger-painted ocean scene caught her eye, bold blues and greens, with a sun that took up half the sky because why shouldn't it? She remembered painting like that once, before life taught her that suns needed to be proportional, that dreams needed to fit into the boxes provided on financial aid forms. After dropping Lily off, Matthew returned to her classroom and sank into the chair at her desk, a battered wooden thing that had probably been old when she was a student herself. The clock on the wall read 4:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes before she needed to pick up her daughter, Emma, from the babysitter's house across town. 13 minutes to grade the spelling tests that sat in a stack before her, to respond to parent emails, to plan tomorrow's lessons, to somehow stretch herself thin enough to cover all the gaps in her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson, Emma's babysitter. Emma has a slight fever. Nothing serious, but thought you should know. She's resting now. Matthew's heart clenched. Fever meant potential illness, which meant potential missed work, which meant no pay because art teachers didn't get sick days. Not when they were contracted part-time despite working full-time hours. It was the math she'd been doing for 6 years, ever since Emma's father, Derek, had decided that fatherhood wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for, and disappeared into the California sunset with a woman who'd promised him freedom and authenticity. She grabbed her worn canvas tote bag, stuffed the ungraded tests inside, and locked her classroom door. The hallway was quiet now, most students gone, just the echo of her footsteps and the distant sound of the school choir practicing in the music room. Their voices drifted through the walls, singing something classical and beautiful that she couldn't quite place. The rain had lessened to a drizzle by the time she reached her car. She had to jiggle the key just right, 2 turns counterclockwise, then 1 sharp turn clockwise before the lock would give. The interior smelled like the vanilla air freshener Emma had insisted they needed, mixed with old coffee and the faint scent of crayons that seemed permanently embedded in the upholstery. Traffic on Van Ness was its usual nightmare, a river of red brake lights stretching toward the Mission District where Mrs. Patterson lived. Matthew drummed her fingers on the steering wheel and tried not to calculate how much gas this commute was costing her. Emma's school, the public school with the good reading program, was in the opposite direction from Sacred Heart. Every day was a triangle of impossibility. Sacred Heart in Pacific Heights, Emma's school in the Sunset, Mrs. Patterson in the Mission, and their apartment in the Tenderloin, squeezed between all of them like an afterthought. The radio crackled with news of another tech IPO. Another young millionaire minted in Silicon Valley's endless gold rush. Matthew switched it off. She didn't need reminding of all the wealth surrounding her that she'd never touch, all the opportunities that seemed to exist in a parallel universe just out of reach. Mrs. Patterson's building was a faded Victorian that had seen better decades. Matthew climbed the steps, the third one creaked, it always creaked, and knocked on the door in their familiar pattern. 3 quick raps, pause, 2 more. Mrs. Patterson opened the door with Emma sleeping against her shoulder. The older woman's face was kind but lined with the same exhaustion that Matthew recognized in her own mirror each morning. "She's been sleeping for about an hour," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "Temperature was 99.8 last I checked. Probably just a bug going around." "Thank you, Rosa," Matthew said, gathering Emma's small backpack with one hand while preparing to take her daughter with the other. "I'll Venmo you tonight." "Tomorrow is fine," Rosa said, but they both knew Matthew would send it tonight because tomorrow might mean choosing between the babysitter payment and dinner. And if she sent it tonight, at least one decision was made. Emma stirred as Matthew carried her down the stairs, her small arms wrapping around her mother's neck. At 5 years old, she was getting heavier, but Matthew wouldn't trade these moments for anything. The weight of her child, the trust in that embrace, the sweet smell of her hair that somehow always reminded Matthew of hope. "Mama," Emma mumbled against her shoulder. "I'm here, baby. We're going home. My tummy hurts a little." "I know, sweetheart. We'll get you some soup and you can watch a movie." "How does that sound? The one with the princess who makes things with ice?" Matthew smiled despite everything. "Yes, that one again." Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that the landlord optimistically called vintage, and everyone else called barely up to code. The elevator had been broken for 2 months, so Matthew climbed the stairs with Emma in her arms, stopping at each landing to adjust her grip and catch her breath. Someone was cooking curry on the 2nd floor, Mr. Patel probably, and the smell made her stomach growl. She'd skipped lunch again, too busy supervising recess duty to eat the sandwich she'd packed. Inside their apartment, Matthew set Emma gently on the couch and turned on the heat. The radiator clanked and hissed before grudgingly producing warmth. The space was small, a 1-bedroom that they made work by having Emma sleep in the bedroom while Matthew took the pull-out couch. But it was theirs. The walls were covered with Emma's artwork, landscapes of impossible colors and creatures that existed only in 5-year-old imaginations. A small bookshelf sagged under the weight of library books, romance novels Matthew picked up at thrift stores, and Emma's growing collection of picture books. She heated up chicken noodle soup from a can, added extra crackers the way Emma liked, and brought it to her daughter along with children's Tylenol. While Emma ate slowly, Matthew finally let herself sit down, let the weight of the day settle over her like a heavy blanket. Her phone buzzed again. An email this time from the Sacred Heart parent portal. She almost ignored it. Parent emails at 6 p.m. rarely brought good news, but duty and habit made her open it. From Victoria Castellano, Room 14 Parent. Subject: Concerns about art curriculum. Matthew's stomach dropped. Victoria Castellano was the mother of twins in her class, a woman who wore pearls to parent-teacher conferences and spoke about her children's education as though she were negotiating a merger. The email was 3 paragraphs of thinly veiled criticism about the lack of structure in Matthew's classroom, concerns about whether Emma Chen's butterfly project met appropriate academic standards, and a suggestion that perhaps Sacred Heart should consider hiring an art teacher with more prestigious credentials. Matthew read it twice, each word landing like a small cut. She'd been teaching for a decade, had her credential from San Francisco State, had letters of recommendation that praised her creativity and connection with students. But she didn't have an MFA from Yale. She hadn't studied under famous artists in Florence. Her credential came from night classes she'd taken while working full-time at a coffee shop, 1 semester at a time across 4 years because that was all she could afford. She closed the email without responding. Margaret Wu had told her never to respond to parent emails after 9 p.m. That's when the anxiety talks, not the thoughtfulness, she'd said. But the words stayed with her, circling like vultures. Emma had finished half her soup and was falling asleep again, the TV playing to itself. Matthew carried her to the bedroom, tucked her under the covers with her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hopscotch, a threadbare toy from a thrift store that Emma treated like priceless treasure. She pressed her lips to Emma's forehead. Still warm, but not worse. "I love you more than all the stars," Matthew whispered, their nightly ritual. "All the stars in the whole sky?" Emma murmured, half asleep. "All the stars in a million skies." Back in the living room, Matthew made herself tea, the cheap kind that came in boxes of 100, not the loose-leaf varieties that her colleagues at Sacred Heart discussed like sommeliers, and finally pulled out the spelling tests. Red pen in hand, she began to grade, making cheerful comments in the margins, drawing smiley faces next to good efforts, writing encouraging notes to students who struggled. She was halfway through the stack when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Probably a spam call about her car's extended warranty. But something made her pick up. "Is this Matthew Shaw?" The voice was professional, female, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Speaking. Ms. Shaw, my name is Jennifer Torres. I'm the executive assistant to Olivia Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global Industries. Ms. Sterling would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." Matthew's mind went blank. Sterling Global Industries. She'd heard the name. Everyone in San Francisco had heard it. One of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, worth billions, helmed by a woman whose face appeared on magazine covers and TED Talk stages. But why would Olivia Sterling want to meet with an art teacher making $42,000 a year? "I'm sorry," Matthew said slowly. "I think you might have the wrong number. I'm a teacher at Sacred Heart Elementary. I don't have any connection to." "We have the correct number, Ms. Shaw. Ms. Sterling specifically requested to meet with you. It concerns a private matter. Would you be available tomorrow evening at 7 p.m.? Ms. Sterling can meet you at a location of your choosing, or we can arrange for a car to bring you to her office." This had to be a mistake, or a scam. Those existed, didn't they? Elaborate schemes to rob people who didn't even have anything worth robbing. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" Matthew asked carefully. "Ms. Sterling prefers to discuss the matter in person. However, I can assure you this is a legitimate request, and Ms. Sterling is prepared to compensate you for your time. Shall we say $500 for the consultation, regardless of the outcome?" $500. Matthew's hand tightened on the phone. That was groceries for a month. New shoes for Emma, who'd been wearing the same pair that was half a size too small. The electric bill that was due next week. "Tomorrow at 7, Matthew heard herself say. "There's a coffee shop on Market Street, Café Reverie. I can meet her there." "Perfect. Miss Sterling will see you then." "Thank you for your time, Miss Shaw." The line went dead. Matthew stared at her phone, convinced she'd imagined the entire conversation. But when she checked her call log, there it was, 8-minute call from an unknown number, just ended. She finished grading the tests in a daze, her mind spinning with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. Maybe Olivia Sterling had a child who needed tutoring. Maybe she was starting some philanthropic education initiative. Maybe this was all an elaborate case of mistaken identity that would be cleared up tomorrow, and Matthew would go home with nothing but a good story to tell Rosa. Outside, the rain had started again, harder now, and somewhere in the building, a baby cried. Emma coughed once in her sleep, and Matthew went to check on her, adjusting the blanket, pressing her hand to her daughter's forehead again. Still warm, but sleeping peacefully. Matthew pulled out the couch bed and lay down without changing into pajamas. The springs creaked under her weight. Another thing that needed replacing in a long list of things that needed replacing. She stared at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the familiar patterns she'd memorized over 3 years in this apartment, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Whatever it was, she'd face it the same way she faced everything. One moment at a time, with her daughter sleeping safely nearby, and hope that somehow, someday, things would get easier. That was the promise she'd made herself 6 years ago when Derek left. When she'd held newborn Emma in her arms and decided that love would be enough. Even when money wasn't. That love would carry them through. The radiator hissed and clanked, filling the small apartment with warmth that would cost too much on next month's utility bill. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, its promises and dreams and opportunities that always seemed to be happening to someone else, somewhere else. Matthew closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to that phone call, to the name Olivia Sterling, to the impossible sum of $500 just for a conversation. In the morning, she'd dress in her one good blazer, the navy one she'd found at Goodwill, barely worn, and she'd meet this stranger, this CEO from a different world. But tonight, she was just tired, just a single mother trying to keep the pieces of her life from flying apart, one day at a time. The rain drummed on. The city slept and woke in cycles. And in a small apartment in the Tenderloin, Matthew Shaw held on to hope with both hands, even as she wondered how much longer she could keep holding on. Morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Emma's fever had broken sometime during the night, and she bounced into the living room at 6:15 a.m. with the relentless energy that only healthy 5-year-olds possessed. Matthew groaned, folded the couch bed back into its daytime shape, and stumbled toward the kitchen to start the coffee maker. A thrift store find that sputtered and wheezed but still produced something approximating caffeine. "Mama, can we have pancakes?" Emma asked, already pulling out her coloring books at the small table that served as their dining room, homework station, and art studio. "How about waffles?" Matthew countered, which really meant, how about the frozen waffles from Trader Joe's that I can pop in the toaster without actually cooking? She'd learned the art of strategic compromise early in motherhood. With syrup. With syrup. While Emma colored, a remarkably detailed picture of what appeared to be a unicorn fighting a dragon. Matthew went through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower in 7 minutes because hot water was expensive. Hair pulled back in a damp bun because she didn't have time to dry it. The navy blazer from Goodwill, paired with black pants that she'd hemmed herself and a white blouse that had been on sale at Target 3 years ago. She looked almost professional, almost like she belonged in a meeting with someone like Olivia Sterling. Almost. Emma's school started at 8:30. Matthew's first class wasn't until 9:45. They had 43 minutes to get across town if traffic cooperated, which it rarely did. Matthew packed Emma's lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, apple slices, those little pretzels shaped like fish that Emma loved, and a juice box, and filled a thermos with coffee for herself. "Ready, Ladybug?" Matthew asked, holding out Emma's jacket. "Ready, Mama Bug," Emma responded, their morning call and response that made the rush feel less frantic. The drive to Emma's school took them through neighborhoods that marked the city's stark divisions like rings in a tree. From the Tenderloin's grit and struggle, through the Castro's rainbow flags and careful gentrification, into the Sunset's fog-wrapped houses where families with dual incomes and backyard gardens lived lives that seemed impossibly stable to Matthew. Emma's school, Jefferson Elementary, was a squat concrete building that had been next in line for renovation for as long as Matthew had lived in San Francisco. The playground equipment was ancient, the paint was peeling, but the teachers were dedicated and the reading program was excellent. That mattered more than fresh paint. Have the best day, Matthew said, kissing Emma's forehead as they stood outside the classroom. You too, Mama. Are you teaching the kindergartners today? I am. They're lucky. You're the best art teacher in the whole world. Matthew's heart swelled. And you're the best daughter in the whole world. In the whole universe, Emma corrected, grinning before running into her classroom where her best friend, Marcus, was already building something elaborate with blocks. Back in the car, Matthew had 28 minutes to get to Sacred Heart. She made it with 4 minutes to spare, racing up to her classroom with her tote bag banging against her hip. The smell of fresh paint greeted her. Someone had been working in the building over the weekend, probably redoing the administrator's offices again. They never seemed to have money for classroom supplies, but somehow the administrative wing got repainted every 2 years. Her first class was kindergarten, 23 5-year-olds who treated art time like it was Christmas morning. Today they were working with clay, making gratitude bowls, where they'd sculpt something they were thankful for on the inside. It was the kind of lesson that looked good in parent newsletters while also teaching fine motor skills and emotional awareness. Miss Shaw, what are you grateful for? Asked Tommy Martinez, his hands already covered in clay despite Matthew's demonstration not having started yet. Matthew paused, holding the ball of clay she'd been preparing. What was she grateful for? The honest answer was complicated. Grateful for Emma's health. Grateful for this job even when it barely paid enough. Grateful for the way morning light came through her classroom windows. But kindergartners needed simpler truths. I'm grateful for students like you who ask good questions, she said, which earned her a gap-toothed grin from Tommy. The morning passed in a blur of clay and small fingers and the constant negotiations that teaching required. Maya, please don't eat the clay. Jackson, we keep the clay on the table, not on the floor. Sophia, that's beautiful. But let's use our words instead of crying when something doesn't work the first time. During lunch, Matthew sat in the teacher's lounge, a room with aspirations of comfort that fell short in every way, and tried to eat the same sandwich she'd packed for Emma, peanut butter and jelly, because buying one ingredient was cheaper than buying 2 different fillings. The other teachers clustered in their usual groups. The elementary school teachers, mostly women in their 40s and 50s who'd been at Sacred Heart for decades. The middle school teachers, younger and more idealistic, still believing they could change the world one lesson plan at a time. And then Matthew, the part-time art teacher who didn't quite fit anywhere. Matthew, how are you? Asked Sarah Chun, one of the second-grade teachers who'd always been kind. Sarah was the only one who seemed to understand the math of Matthew's life, maybe because she'd grown up working class before marrying a software engineer and joining the comfortable middle class. Tired, Matthew admitted. Emma had a fever last night. Is she okay? Better this morning. Just a bug, I think. Being a single parent is impossible, Sarah said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I don't know how you do it. One day at a time, Matthew said, which was both true and inadequate. How did you explain that you did it because you had no choice? That every morning you woke up and made 1,000 small decisions that added up to survival? The conversation shifted to school gossip. Apparently the middle school drama teacher was dating someone from the board of directors, which was either romantic or a conflict of interest depending on who you asked. Matthew listened with half her attention while the other half worried about tonight's meeting. She'd Googled Olivia Sterling during her prep period. The woman was 41, unmarried, no children, and worth an estimated $3.2 billion. Her company, Sterling Global, had started as a software firm and expanded into everything from cloud computing to artificial intelligence to entertainment streaming. What could someone like that want with someone like Matthew? The afternoon brought her upper elementary classes, 4th and 5th graders who were just beginning to develop real artistic skill alongside devastating self-consciousness. I can't draw, they'd say, and Matthew would spend half the lesson convincing them that everyone could draw. That art wasn't about perfection but expression. By 3:30 p.m., when her last class ended, Matthew's feet ached and her voice was hoarse from talking over 23 kindergartners. She had 3 hours before the meeting with Olivia Sterling, 3 hours to pick up Emma, feed her dinner, and somehow transform her anxiety into something resembling composure. Emma was in a good mood when Matthew picked her up, chattering about how Marcus had shared his crackers at snack time and how they'd learned about butterflies in science, and could they please get a butterfly kit so they could watch caterpillars turn into butterflies at home? Maybe for your birthday, Matthew said, which was code for, "We can't afford that right now, but I don't want to disappoint you." "My birthday is 7 months away," Emma protested. "Then you have 7 months to keep being good," Matthew said, tickling her daughter's ribs until she giggled. They stopped at the grocery store, Safeway, not Whole Foods, because Matthew had learned to navigate the difference between aspiration and reality. She bought pasta and Jared sauce for dinner, the store-brand kind that Emma couldn't tell apart from the fancy stuff. While they shopped, Matthew caught herself doing the math she always did. $4.99 for pasta and sauce meant she had $23.47 left until Friday's paycheck, minus $12 for Emma's school lunch account, minus $15 for gas, which left her with not enough if anything unexpected happened. But then, when did she have enough? At home, Emma helped make dinner, standing on her step stool to stir the sauce while Matthew boiled the pasta. They ate together at their small table, Emma's feet swinging back and forth as she told Matthew every detail of her day, including the deeply important fact that Marcus thought dinosaurs were cooler than unicorns, which was obviously wrong. "What do you think, Mama?" Emma asked seriously. "Dinosaurs or unicorns?" Matthew pretended to consider this with appropriate gravity. "I think they're both cool in different ways. Dinosaurs were real, which is amazing. Unicorns are magical, which is also amazing." "You always say things like that," Emma said, but she was smiling. "Things like what? Like everybody can be right about different things." "Well, they can be." After dinner, Matthew called Rosa to see if she could watch Emma for a few hours. Rosa agreed immediately. She loved Emma like a granddaughter, and the feeling was mutual. Matthew drove Emma to Rosa's apartment, feeling guilty about the extra expense but not having any other choice. "I'll be back by 9:30, Matthew promised, hugging Emma tight. "Where are you going?" Emma asked. "Just a meeting for work, baby. Nothing exciting." "Okay. Can Rosa and I make cookies?" "If Rosa says it's okay," Matthew said, looking at Rosa, who was already nodding. At 6:45 p.m., Matthew sat in her car outside Café Reverie and tried to calm her racing heart. Through the window, she could see the warm interior, people bent over laptops or talking in pairs, the espresso machine hissing and steaming. It looked like a normal coffee shop, a safe place for this surreal meeting. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair had dried into something approximating intentional waves. Her blazer was wrinkle-free. She looked like a professional adult, she told herself. She looked like someone who belonged in a meeting with a billionaire CEO. She didn't believe it, but she told herself anyway. At 6:58, a black town car pulled up outside the cafe. Matthew watched as a woman stepped out, tall, elegant, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Matthew made in 3 months. Her dark hair was cut in a sharp bob, and even from across the street, she moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Olivia Sterling. Matthew forced herself out of her Honda, locked the door, jiggle, turn, and crossed the street on shaking legs. When she entered the cafe, Olivia was already at a corner table, 2 coffee cups waiting. She stood when Matthew approached, extending her hand. "Matthew Shaw." Her voice was warm but professional, her handshake firm. "Yes, Ms. Sterling. Please call me Olivia. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I hope this location works for you." "It's fine," Matthew said, sitting down in the chair across from Olivia. Up close, she could see the fine lines around Olivia's eyes, the evidence that even billionaires aged like everyone else. But there was something in her expression, a tightness around her mouth, a shadow in her eyes, that suggested this wasn't a casual meeting. "I took the liberty of ordering you a latte," Olivia said. "I hope that's all right. If you prefer something else." "A latte is perfect. Thank you." Matthew wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for something to hold. For a moment they sat in silence. Around them, the cafe continued its evening rhythm. Orders called out, conversations humming, the door chiming each time someone entered. Finally, Olivia spoke. "I'm sure you're wondering why I asked to meet with you." "The thought crossed my mind," Matthew said, attempting lightness despite her nerves. Olivia smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This isn't easy to say, so I'm going to be direct. 35 years ago, I was born to a woman named Diane Shaw. She was 17, unmarried, and unable to care for a baby. She gave me up for adoption to a family named Sterling." Olivia paused, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. 2 months ago, I hired a private investigator to find my birth family. What I discovered is that Diane Shaw died 8 years ago. But she had another child, a daughter born 15 years after me. The cafe noise seemed to fade into white noise. Matthew stared at Olivia, her brain struggling to process the words. "That daughter," Olivia continued quietly, "is you, Matthew. I'm your sister." The word sister hung in the air between them like something solid, something that would change everything it touched. Matthew's hands trembled around her coffee cup. Sister. She had a sister. Not just any sister, but Olivia Sterling, whose face was on magazine covers, whose net worth was measured in billions, who lived in a universe so far from Matthew's own that they might as well have been on different planets. "I don't," Matthew started, her voice coming out hoarse. She cleared her throat. "I don't understand. My mother never said anything about having another child." "She probably wanted to forget," Olivia said softly. "The adoption records were sealed. Diane never tried to contact the Sterlings, never tried to find me. Based on what the investigator discovered, she moved from Ohio to California when she was 20, started over completely. Met your father when she was 32, had you a year later." Matthew's mind raced back through memories of her mother. Diane, who died of ovarian cancer when Matthew was 26, who'd worked as a hotel maid and never complained, who'd always seemed to carry a sadness that Matthew couldn't name. She'd been a quiet woman, private, the kind of person who kept her past locked away even from her own daughter. "What was her name?" Matthew asked suddenly. "When she was 17, before she came to California?" "Diane Harper," Olivia said. "She changed it to Shaw when she moved west." Harper. Matthew had never heard that name in her life. Her mother had buried that identity so completely that even her gravestone said Diane Shaw, nothing before, nothing after. "I need you to understand," Olivia continued, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not here to disrupt your life or make demands. But when I learned about you, I had to meet you. You're the only biological family I have left." "What about your adoptive family?" Matthew asked. "The Sterlings." Something flickered across Olivia's face. Pain, quickly masked. "My adoptive parents died in a car accident when I was 19. They were only children, no siblings, no cousins. It's been just me for a long time." Matthew felt a strange rush of empathy for this woman who had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Thank you." Olivia took a sip of her coffee, and Matthew noticed her hand was shaking slightly. Even billionaires got nervous, apparently. "I know this is a lot to process. I'm happy to provide DNA evidence if you need proof. I have the adoption records, the investigator's report." "No," Matthew interrupted. "I mean, yes, maybe eventually, but..." She looked at Olivia, really looked at her, and saw it. The shape of the eyes, the way her mouth curved slightly down on one side even when she smiled. Features Matthew saw every morning in her own mirror. "I believe you." They sat in silence again, this time weighted with the enormity of what had just been revealed. Around them, the cafe continued its oblivious dance. A barista called out, "Vanilla latte for Tom." Someone laughed at something on their laptop. The door chimed. "I have a daughter," Matthew said finally. "Emma. She's 5. Olivia's expression transformed with something that looked like wonder. "You have a daughter. That makes me an aunt." "I guess it does." Matthew pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and showed Olivia her lock screen. A picture of Emma grinning with her 2 front teeth missing, holding up a painting she'd made at school. "This was from last month." "She's beautiful," Olivia said, and there was genuine emotion in her voice. She has your smile. Everyone says she looks like me, Matthew said. Her father isn't in the picture. Hasn't been since she was 6 months old. I'm sorry. That must be incredibly difficult. We manage. It was Matthew's standard response, automatic as breathing. Then, feeling brave or possibly reckless, she added, "We're broke actually, like seriously broke. I teach part-time at a private school where I barely make enough to cover rent. Emma deserves so much more than I can give her, but I'm trying. I'm always trying." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because the surreal nature of this meeting had stripped away her usual defenses. Maybe because she was tired of pretending she had everything under control. Whatever the reason, the truth spilled out, raw and honest. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's actually why I asked to meet you in person rather than just sending a letter or email. Because what I'm about to propose needs to be a conversation, not a transaction." Matthew's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I want to give you money," Olivia said bluntly. "A lot of money. Enough that you'd never have to worry again. That Emma would have every opportunity. That you could quit teaching if you wanted or open your own art studio or do whatever you've dreamed of doing but couldn't afford." The words should have sounded like salvation. Instead, they felt like a trap. "How much?" Matthew asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $20 million. The number didn't even compute. 20 million. That wasn't money. It was a fantasy, a punchline, an amount so absurd that Matthew almost laughed. She didn't laugh. She couldn't breathe. "I can't," she started, but Olivia held up a hand. "Before you say no, let me explain. I'm worth over $3 billion. 20 million is less than 1% of my wealth. To me, it's nothing. To you, it would be everything. You're my sister, Matthew. Your family. And family takes care of each other." Matthew's mind spun. $20 million. She could pay off every debt, move out of the Tenderloin, give Emma a yard to play in, a good school, college already paid for. She could stop calculating grocery totals in her head, stop choosing between heat and electricity, stop waking up at 3 a.m. terrified about what would happen if her car finally died or Emma got seriously sick. But something felt wrong. Something in the way Olivia was watching her. The careful neutrality of her expression that suggested there was more coming. "What's the catch?" Matthew asked. Olivia set down her coffee cup carefully. "There's no catch exactly, but I need you to understand the reality of what accepting that money would mean. The moment the transfer goes through, you become a different person in the eyes of the world. Rich people are treated differently, perceived differently, and I need to know. I need to know if you're someone I can trust. Someone who won't change." "I don't understand." "I've spent 20 years building Sterling Global," Olivia said, her voice taking on a harder edge. 20 years of 16-hour days, of sacrificing everything personal for professional success. And in that time, I've learned that when you have money, really have it, everyone wants something from you. Every friendship is suspect. Every relationship is transactional. People see the wealth first and the person second, if they see the person at all. Matthew thought about the parents at Sacred Heart, the way they looked at her when she drove up in her battered Honda, the pitying smiles, the condescending offers to help out with anything you might need. She'd been on the receiving end of that dynamic her whole life. "You think I'll become like them?" Matthew said slowly. "Like the people who treat you as a bank account?" "No," Olivia said quickly. "Not exactly. But money changes people, Matthew. Sometimes in obvious ways, sometimes in subtle ones. Right now, you're someone who knows what it's like to struggle, to make impossible choices, to understand that not everything can be bought. That's valuable. That's real. And She paused, something vulnerable crossing her face. "I've been alone for so long. When I found out about you, I let myself hope that maybe I'd found someone who could see me as a person first. As Olivia, not as Olivia Sterling, CEO." The cafe had grown quieter. It was past 8 p.m. now, the evening crowd thinning out. Matthew looked at this woman, her sister, impossibly, and saw beneath the perfect suit and the billions of dollars to something lonely and desperate for genuine connection. "You want me to stay poor?" Matthew said, not quite a question. God, no. Olivia looked horrified. I want you to be comfortable. I want Emma to have everything she needs. But I want to get to know you as you are now, before money complicates everything. I want to know if we can be sisters, real sisters, before wealth enters the equation and ruins it. So the 20 million is real, completely real. I'm not taking it away. Olivia pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. This is my personal attorney. Call him anytime, tomorrow, next week, 10 years from now, and say the word and the money is yours. No strings, no questions asked. But I'm asking you, as someone who desperately wants a family that isn't based on financial transactions, to wait, to let us get to know each other first, to let me be someone's sister before I'm someone's benefactor. Matthew picked up the card. Arthur Chun, attorney at law with a San Francisco address. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. Real. How long? Matthew asked. How long do you want me to wait? I don't know, Olivia admitted. A year? Until it feels right? I know I'm asking you to continue struggling when I could end that struggle with one phone call. I know how selfish that sounds. But I'm terrified, Matthew. I'm terrified that the moment you become rich, you'll see me the way everyone else does. And I can't lose the possibility of having a real sister. Not when I just found you. In the street outside, a car honked. Someone shouted in Mandarin. The city continued its endless churn of life and commerce and dreams. Matthew thought about Emma asleep at Rose's, about the rent due next week, about the constant arithmetic of survival that defined her days. $20 million. One phone call away. All she had to do was say yes. But Olivia was looking at her with such naked hope, such desperate loneliness, that Matthew felt something shift in her chest. She thought about her mother, Diane, who'd given away one baby and kept the other, who'd carried secrets to her grave. She thought about all the times she'd wished for family, for someone who understood, for a sister to talk to when the world felt impossibly heavy. I'll make you a deal, Matthew heard herself say. I won't call your attorney. Not yet. But you have to be honest with me about everything. About your life, about our mother, about what you want from this relationship. No more secrets, no more tests. And you have to meet Emma. Because if we're going to be family, that means accepting all of me, including the part that's a struggling single mom. Olivia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Deal. Matthew Shaw's life existed in the fragile space between making it work and falling apart. At 32, she was a part-time art teacher at Sacred Heart Academy, one of San Francisco's most prestigious private schools, earning barely enough to support herself and her 5-year-old daughter, Emma. Every day was an exercise in careful mathematics, calculating which bills could wait, which groceries were essential, whether the car would last another month. She lived in a cramped apartment in the Tenderloin, one of the city's grittiest neighborhoods, where the pull-out couch served as her bed and Emma's small bedroom was their one luxury. Matthew had grown up in Atherton with adoptive parents who loved her fiercely but died too young, leaving her to build a company from nothing because work was easier than feeling alone, though in her case, the company was simply survival itself. Emma's father, Derek, had left 6 years ago when Matthew was pregnant, choosing freedom over fatherhood. Since then, Matthew had carried everything alone. The financial burden, the emotional weight, the endless responsibility of single parenthood. She relied on Rosa, her babysitter, and her own stubborn determination to give Emma the best childhood poverty would allow. Then came the email that changed everything. An attorney named Arthur Chun requested a meeting to discuss a private family matter of significant importance. Matthew almost deleted it, assuming it was spam or a scam. But curiosity won out, and she agreed to meet at an upscale cafe, the kind of place where a single coffee cost what she usually spent on lunch for a week. At the cafe, she met Olivia Sterling, a billionaire tech entrepreneur who revealed they were biological sisters. Their birth mother had given them both up for adoption to different families. Olivia had spent years and considerable resources tracking down her only biological sibling, hiring private investigators to find the sister she'd never known. The revelation was staggering. Matthew had a sister, not just any sister, but one of the most successful businesswomen in the country. Olivia explained that she wanted to give Matthew $20 million, enough to transform her life completely. But there was a catch, and it was an unusual one. Olivia asked Matthew to wait before taking the money, to stay poor a little longer so they could build something real, a genuine relationship not complicated by wealth. She wanted to know if Matthew could value her as a sister rather than as a benefactor, if they could forge a connection based on blood and choice rather than financial transaction. It was, Matthew realized, the most heartbreaking request she'd ever received. She could handle her own poverty. She'd been managing it for years. But Emma deserved better. Emma deserved a room of her own, a yard with grass, schools with new textbooks and functional heating. Emma deserved the childhood Matthew couldn't afford to give her. Yet there was something in Olivia's proposition that resonated deeply. Matthew recognized the bone-deep loneliness in Olivia's eyes, the isolation of being fundamentally alone in the world. Matthew knew that feeling intimately. She'd lived it for 6 years, carrying everything by herself, having no one to call when she was drowning. Over coffee, the sisters shared their stories. Olivia spoke about growing up with every material advantage but profound emotional isolation, about adoptive parents who were busy and important, about building a tech empire because creating something was easier than confronting loneliness. Matthew talked about Derek leaving, about teaching art to wealthy children while barely making rent, about the strange mathematics of poverty where buying one expensive thing was sometimes cheaper than repeatedly buying cheap versions. They agreed to try. Matthew would wait on the money 6 months, she decided privately, to give the relationship a genuine chance. They would meet regularly, get to know each other, build the foundation of sisterhood before wealth complicated everything. That first weekend, they met at Dubosi Park with Emma. Olivia passed the 5-year-old's unicorn test and watched her swing, and something began to take root between them, tentative, fragile, but real. Olivia revealed that her private investigator had found Matthew's entire life. The student loans, the overdue electric bills, the thrift store clothes, Emma's free lunch qualification at school. Matthew should have felt violated, but there was also relief in the transparency. No pretending, no hiding. Olivia knew exactly how broke she was and was there anyway. Over the following weeks, a rhythm developed. Coffee dates, Saturday lunches at inexpensive restaurants Matthew chose, walks through the city where they traded stories and slowly became friends. Olivia was funny, surprisingly down-to-earth once you got past the intimidating exterior. She loved terrible reality TV and asked about Emma's adventures with genuine interest. But the disparity between their lives was always present, a ghost in every conversation. When Olivia ordered appetizers without checking prices, mentioned her housekeeper and driver casually, or discussed business trips to Tokyo as easily as Matthew talked about trips to Target, the gulf between them became painfully apparent. Then Matthew's car died. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 2 blocks from Emma's school. The transmission was gone, a $2,000 repair on a vehicle not worth fixing. Matthew had $347 in her checking account and maxed out credit cards. She could have called Olivia with one phone call and solved the problem instantly. Instead, she took buses. The bus schedule required leaving at 6:30 a.m., 3 transfers each way, adding 3 hours to their already exhausting days. Emma grew tired and cranky. Matthew was late to work multiple times, earning concerned looks from the school director and pointed emails from Victoria Castellano, a wealthy parent who'd been criticizing Matthew for months. Matthew borrowed money on a credit card cash advance, at a terrible interest rate that would haunt her, and bought a 1998 Corolla with 200,000 miles for $800. It was ugly and smelled like cigarette smoke, but it ran. She told herself she was handling things, maintaining her independence, proving she could stand on her own. She didn't tell Olivia about any of it. The lie, telling Olivia that Emma was tired from a growth spurt when really she was exhausted from the bus schedule, tasted bitter. It was the first real dishonesty between them, and it marked a turning point. 2 weeks later, during their regular coffee date, Olivia noticed something was wrong. When pressed, Matthew finally admitted the truth about the car, about the buses, about struggling to keep everything together. "Why didn't you tell me?" Olivia asked. Matthew responded, "Because I didn't want you to think I was after your money." The conversation that followed was raw and painful. Matthew explained that needing help felt like admitting weakness, like proving she couldn't handle independence. She'd worked so hard to survive Derek's abandonment, to build a life without depending on anyone. Accepting Olivia's help, even for legitimate needs, felt like surrendering the part of herself that was strong and capable. But Olivia challenged this. "You're still strong and capable even if you accept help." Matthew broke down, explaining what Olivia could never truly understand. The daily reality of poverty, the constant exhaustion, the lying awake doing math that never added up, telling Emma, maybe later, about everything because now was never affordable. Every interaction with Olivia highlighted the enormous gap between them. The casual way Olivia moved through the world versus Matthew's constant calculations and compromises. Olivia admitted her own loneliness. "I'd trade it all for what you have. For someone who chooses me over the money." Both sisters were crying in the cafe, their pain different but equally real. They established new rules. Matthew wouldn't ask for money, but if Olivia saw her struggling and wanted to help, she had to ask first. No surprises, no just fixing things without permission. They would discuss everything as equals. And Matthew would be there for Olivia's emotional needs too. This couldn't be a one-way street where Matthew was always the charity case. Matthew also revealed her deepest fear. That wealth would transform her into the people she'd spent her life resenting. The entitled parents at Sacred Heart who looked at her like she was less than. She was terrified Emma would grow up spoiled and disconnected from reality. Olivia offered wisdom. "Money doesn't change who you are at your core. It amplifies what's already there." Matthew had opportunities to take shortcuts her whole life and hadn't. That told Olivia everything. They made a new deal. 3 more months of building their relationship. At the end, Matthew could call the attorney with no judgment or choose not to. They'd figure it out together. Those 3 months transformed everything. Olivia showed up in ways that honored their boundaries and respected Matthew's need for agency. She'd text about reality TV they could watch together. She invited Matthew and Emma to her Pacific Heights mansion but spent the visit building blanket forts on the floor, ignoring expensive furniture to play with a 5-year-old. When Emma's birthday approached, Olivia asked permission before planning anything. The party was perfect. A bounce house at the park, pizza, Emma's actual friends from school. Nothing pretentious or overwhelming. Emma told everyone that Aunt Olivia had helped plan it. And the words made both sisters tear up. Thanksgiving arrived, and Olivia came to their small apartment with ingredients Matthew couldn't afford. Fresh turkey, real cranberries, bakery pie. But she cooked alongside Matthew and Rosa, laughing about being a billionaire who couldn't cook. They ate around Matthew's cramped table, barely room for 4 people, and Matthew realized this was what family felt like. Not perfect, not wealthy, just present. Emma adored her aunt. The women texted daily, saw each other twice weekly. The relationship deepened into genuine sisterhood. But financial pressure continued mounting. Medical bills, rent increases, Emma's constantly growing feet needing new shoes. The reality of poverty didn't ease just because Matthew had found family. 2 days before their 3-month deadline, Victoria Castellano filed a formal complaint against Matthew with the school board. She claimed Matthew's teaching was unprofessional and suggested Matthew's economic situation was affecting her performance. Thinly veiled classism disguised as legitimate concern. The school director, Margaret Wu, was sympathetic but serious. Victoria was influential with the board and wanted changes to the art program. She would fight for Matthew, but it was a real threat. Matthew faced a choice. Fight the complaint on her own merit, or make one phone call and never worry about Victoria Castellano's opinions again. The attorney's number was right there. The 3-month deadline had arrived, and now she had a concrete reason to accept the money. That evening, she told Olivia everything. Olivia wanted to help immediately, hire the best employment lawyer, fight the discrimination. Or Matthew could call the attorney tomorrow as planned. In Olivia's mansion, watching Emma play happily in a room bigger than their entire apartment, Matthew wrestled with her decision. She was exhausted from fighting constantly, but she was also terrified of losing herself, of becoming unrecognizable to her own daughter. Olivia promised, "If you decide to take the money, I'll be there every step of the way." We'll figure out how to stay grounded together. Matthew made a choice that night, but not the one everyone expected. She decided not to call the attorney, not yet. She would fight the complaint at Sacred Heart on her own merit, prove she deserved to be there regardless of her bank account. If she lost, if they fired her anyway, then she'd make the call. But not before. 2 weeks later, the school board dismissed Victoria's complaint. Margaret Wu had presented Matthew's excellent teaching evaluations, student testimonials, and letters from parents who actually valued good education over social politics. Victoria withdrew her twins from Sacred Heart in protest, but Matthew didn't care. She'd won on her own terms. The money remained waiting, Arthur Chen's card still in Matthew's wallet. A promise and a safety net. But Matthew chose something different. She chose to keep building her relationship with Olivia slowly, carefully, honestly. Olivia learned to cook simple meals and showed up for Emma's school events. Matthew learned to accept help with reasonable things. A winter coat for Emma, assistance with medical bills, without compromising her sense of self. They became the family both had always needed. Matthew discovered something important. She could survive poverty. She'd been doing it for years. What she couldn't survive was loneliness. And neither could Olivia. Two sisters from vastly different worlds built a bridge between them. One honest conversation at a time. The money could wait. Family couldn't. In a small apartment in the Tenderloin, with a sister who would always be there and a daughter who had gained an aunt, Matthew Shaw discovered that sometimes the richest life was the one you built yourself, regardless of what was in your bank account. This story asks profound questions about wealth, identity, and human connection. Can you build genuine relationships when extreme financial inequality exists between people? Does accepting help mean surrendering independence? What do we sacrifice when we insist on going it alone? Matthew and Olivia's journey shows us that the answers aren't simple. Matthew's pride was both her strength and her limitation. It kept her independent but also isolated. Olivia's wealth was both blessing and curse. It solved problems but couldn't buy connection. Their solution wasn't perfect. Matthew didn't take the money immediately, but she didn't completely refuse it either. She found a middle path, building the relationship first, accepting small helps when truly needed, maintaining her sense of self while allowing vulnerability. She proved she valued her sister as a person before a benefactor, but she also kept the option open for when survival required it. The story reminds us that poverty isn't noble. It's exhausting, grinding, and unfair. But wealth isn't automatically corrupting either. What matters is character, intention, and the courage to be honest about our needs and fears. Most powerfully, the story illustrates that loneliness can be more devastating than financial struggle. Both sisters were suffering before they found each other. Matthew from poverty, Olivia from isolation. Together, they created something neither could build alone. Family. If the story moved you, touched something in your heart, or made you think differently about wealth, struggle, and human connection, I invite you to subscribe. Join our community of listeners who believe in stories that explore the complexity of being human. Stories that don't offer easy answers but ask important questions. Subscribe to hear more narratives that challenge, inspire, and remind us what truly matters in this complicated world we share.